Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Gianpel Dell'Angelo and I'm an associate professor of water governance and politics at the Vrije Universiteit in Amsterdam. And I'm very happy to collaborate in hosting this initiative today. So I'll give you a little bit, a couple of words about why we are in this space and how all of this materialized. 3 years ago, as part of the innovative training network called the New Wave, which was a EU-funded project on water governance, we started an initiative called Water Space, which is a platform on water science, which had as the major, let's say, activity, an annual festival that we consistently run here. So this is the 3rd year that we are organizing something. And this Water Space initiative is a collaboration between the New Wave project and the Fundación Enrique Miralles. So right now we are in the Fundación Enrique Miralles, which is a cultural foundation that has been dedicated to the legacy of the most important Spanish architects that unfortunately passed very young. He started his work together with his wife, Benedetta Tagliabue, and they created the architectural studio called EMBT, Enrique Miralles Benedetta Tagliabue, which is right here. So here there is a secret entrance to the architectural studio, and there is the... So this, let's say, is the cultural branch of the architectural studio. And something that is happening behind your back, which we had to push on the frontiers, on the margins of the space, is an exhibit on the water-related projects of Enrique Miralles. And actually today it's a very special day because today it's the anniversary of his passing. So it was several years ago on this date that unfortunately he left us very prematurely. Benedetta is not here. She will be here later on. She sends her regards. And I will also invite you to perhaps come back to this space in next days if you're in Barcelona, because the exhibit then will be visible. This is also where we are going to have one of the closing events tonight for Pollen, a party, so we had to make space for this. And perhaps a last thing that I will mention before I introduce today's panel is that together with Benedetta we had a project called The Architecture of Virtual Water, which was showcased at the last Biennale of Architecture in Venice. And this project, there is a little model there, but it's behind, it's on the other side, which shows the project. And the project is now shown at the Roca Gallery in Barcelona, it's an open exhibit. If all of this and how architecture and water science interact raises your curiosity, I'm sure it does. If you have time, please visit the Roca Gallery. It's a private space, not my ideal type of space, but it's a good space for an exhibit. Said this, I am very happy to introduce Tanvi Agraval, and I will just leave it to you to introduce today's panel. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Gianpel, for introducing the space and for inviting us to be in this really beautiful watery space for this watery panel. So maybe I'll give a little bit of context to what we're doing here. So this panel is sort of a continuation of a conversation that Amit Angshu, who's disappeared, but he was the second speaker today, he and I have been having sort of for the past year. And it's really cool now that we get to chat about it with so many even cooler people. So to bring you to speed to what we've been talking about, at its core, the panel is basically, starting from a familiar but important debate in political ecology, which is that the field originally aimed to bring questions of power into political ecology, into ecology, but over time it often leaned more heavily into politics than towards broader socio-environmental relations. And this has, since the 90s, led to questions like, where is the ecology in political ecology? And defenders of political ecology have argued for maintaining its critical political edge while inviting deeper ecological and material engagement. So water is a particularly rich site for revisiting this debate. While it's often seen as an object of politics, it's also recognized increasingly as having shared agency, where its materiality participates in politics. But water is not singular. It varies by physical state and associations and discursive and epistemological constructions. So this multiplicity renders it inherently slippery, and it's susceptible to various meanings and appropriations. This also brings normative and epistemological conundrums on whose knowledge counts and where to see from. Now, this is all particularly important when we think about how these debates have largely taken place within Western and androcentric contexts. And this panel, therefore, contributes to efforts to shift the center of gravity. And what we'd like to have today is a conversation on materiality, but theorizing water from majority world perspectives. So the hope is we can engage with the materiality of water, not to depoliticize it, but to make it more political. So this is part 2 of a panel that started yesterday, where we shared the political agency of water in oceans, irrigation ditches, and aquifers, as it is known by marine scientists, government bureaucrats, and farmers of different caste, class, and gender positions. So today we have another very exciting set of speakers who we hope will provoke conversation. So 20 minutes per presentation. I will be sitting here, so please look my way. And I would request that after the presentation, maybe 1 or 2 just clarificatory questions, but please keep your meaty questions for later, because we do have time for conversation where everybody can be involved. So yeah, only clarificatory questions after the presentation would be great. So starting things off, Risk Hazenkamp and Zulekha Sheikh. I'll leave it to you to introduce yourselves.
Hi, welcome everybody. First, we like to thank also Waterspace, and we also like to thank Tanvi. And where are you, Amitanshu? There you are. Thank you so much for hosting this panel at Pollen. Zulekha will now lead a short meditation to start our presentation.
All right, I'm sure everyone's had a very intense week, so we decided to do a little bit of a different start to also just have us all arrive in the space. So if you want to take a moment to get comfortable in your seat, and if you're sitting on the floor, see if there's ways that you can adjust so that you are more comfortable in your seat. If you'd like to, I invite you to gently close your eyes. If you're not comfortable with that, then you can focus on the screen behind me or on a point in front of you that isn't moving. Trying now to first locate your breath in your body. Perhaps this is high up in your chest or low down in your belly. See if you can allow your breath to simply be. Taking notice of the sounds that are around you, allowing them to just gently float away. We're going to do a short breathing exercise. And for this, you simply need to follow the counts that I provide. So wherever you are in your breathing, start to exhale through your nose. And inhale for 1, 2, 3, 4, and hold. And exhale for 4, 3, 2, 1, and hold on empty. Inhaling 1, 2, 3, 4, and hold. And exhale 4, 3, 2, 1, and hold. Last round. Inhaling 1, 2, 3, 4, and hold. Exhaling for 3, 2, 1, and release. Allowing the breath to return to its normal rhythm. Sensing if you notice any small differences, perhaps in the activity of your mind, or in your breathing, or simply if your body is in just more of a relaxed state. And when you're ready, you can gently blink open your eyes, taking a moment to look around, hopefully feeling a bit better. Yeah.
Thank you. So, our first encounter took place online in 2020 as part of the 11th edition of the Middelburg Decolonial Summer School, now renamed after the late Argentinian-US decolonial feminist philosopher Maria Lugones. We spent 3 intensive weeks together, only to realize afterwards that this would be Maria Lugones' final teachings. She passed away just 6 days after we had said goodbye to one another. 2 months later, still fully immersed in the COVID-19 restrictions, we met for the first time as 2 physical bodies in a situated place. We found ourselves geopolitically located below sea level, and we found ourselves questioning privileges, inheritances, oppressions, and the afterlives of the Dutch colonial empire. We are 2 researchers distinctly positioned across the majority-minority world divide, collaborating across differences and positionalities. Although we were both born at the seaside and both embrace water as our ancient ancestor in our research, our relationality towards ancestry and our capability to understand water's agency could not be further apart. It is through water as mediator with other dimensions, sensory, metaphysical, spiritually quantum, that we share and reinvigorate personal stories, collective meditations, interspecies memories, healing rituals, and speculative fabulations. Are there ways in which these aspects of the political ecology of water can bridge the currents which, however different they may seem between us at first glance, animate a shared politics of refusal rooted in a commitment to communal life-affirming practices? Over the winter we read Theory of Water, the latest book of Michi Sajik, Nishnabek writer, musician and academic Leanne Petasamosako Simpson, and we were struck by their notion of sintering. Sintering is about the durability of the bonding of snowflakes. In Simpson's words, the first thing a snowflake does when it lands from the sky world is to join bonds, actual physical bonds with its neighbors. Sintering is slow deformation. In this lecture performance, we acknowledge that the colonial wound touches us both, albeit in different ways. In navigating this difference, we are guided by Simpson's sintering to name the relationality of our practices. We travel between our different water worlds, between microorganisms and the cosmos, in the colonial space of the laboratory opposed to the free-flowing rain, rivers, and oceans. We stay in intimate conversation but refuse to melt into an assimilated singular voice. Like water, we acknowledge her refusal of singularity. Rain, oceans, steam, lakes, rivers, cenotes, aquifers, streams, tears, clouds, ice. With different styles, ebbing and flowing, we each speak with different styles, ebbing and flowing, we each speak from our own position, in our own register, conceding that sometimes waves crash into each other and don't make sense.
I will start with my own artistic practice, and that's poetry, in a poem called A Breath. 1625. Slaves on your boat, trawling for greed, crowded as always, wrists bear chains as their only chattels. Slaves on your boat, rowing for gluttony, bodies as property. Slaves on your boat, dying in captivity, a breath for escape, one breath too many. Tides lash the ocean for its complicity, the clouds darken and howl in humiliation. (1878). Indentured laborers on your boat, sailing for empire. Crowded as always, arms carry saris holding a few possessions. Indentured laborers on your boat, protected for profit, bodies as commodity. Indentured laborers on your boat, drenched in servitude, a breath for liberty, one breath too many. Swells thrash the Kalapani for its collusion, the moon winces and wanes in disgrace. 2018. Migrants on a boat floating for a better life. Crowded as always, hands hold parcels of belongings. Migrants on a boat sinking for sanctuary, bodies as disposable. Migrants on a boat drowning for freedom, a breath for safety, one breath too many. Waves beat the sea for its connivance. The sun recoils and dives down in shame.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for those incredible, powerful words, Suleika. And can you tell us about the importance of your artistic practice in theorizing in and with water?
Thank you. Riz, can you pour me a bit of water, please? Thanks. So poetry allows me to bring fluid movement to concurrent geopolitical processes across time and space. Gives space for the complexity of inherited colonial categories, but more importantly, provides an avenue in which subordinated knowledges destabilize the strictures of the Western episteme. That is to say, it privileges non-Western, indigenous, often oral-based forms of knowledge that escapes capture. It is the language through which my ancestors, including the waters and land, speaks through me. It thus holds the capacity to change the terms of the conversation and bring forward other worlds of meaning, where intergenerational lived experiences are validated without the empirical need for evidence, or rather empirical demand for evidence. As Robbie Shilliam as Robbie Shilliam points out in Decolonizing Politics, speaking in relation to the absence of colonized voices in the archive of politics, those who have suffered the violence and injustices of multiple oppressions do not need to have read Aristotle to understand their condition. As with many theorists from the majority world with a colonized history, water becomes the entry point of theorization. Similarly, this poem uses my positionality as a South African of South Indian indentured descent, indenture being the system of exploitative labor that replaced slavery. Replaced slavery after its abolishment, to mark my position in the geopolitics of knowledge. The Kalapani, the Black Waters, culturally plays a significant role in the indentured diaspora. It is said that crossing the Kalapani severs a person's connection to the holy waters of India, thus losing caste, social standing, and identity, becoming outcasts. And whilst the majority who were indentured were from lower castes, this was a way out of the oppressive caste system. Nonetheless, it replaced one master for another. This movement of displacement, enslavement, indenture, EU border regimes creates the commons upon which crossings are possible. In using M. Jackie Alexander's crossings, we are able to reach out across difference to each other's life worlds, connecting relations across colonial wounds and surpassing any exclusivity to marginalization. Thinking together through the ways in which water was and continues to be used as a technology in colonization to perpetuate atrocities for profit. How water continues to be violently named resource. How water is currently being used as a weapon of war in Palestine. Demonstrating the ways in which colonial logics intractably endure. Why refusal and fugitivity becomes tantamount. Refusal here, in the words of Black feminist theorist Tina Marie Campt, being a rejection of the status quo as livable and the creation of possibility in the face of negation. That is, a refusal to recognize a system that renders you fundamentally illegible and unintelligible. The decision to reject the terms of diminished subjecthood with which one is presented, using negation as a generative and creative source of disorderly power to embrace the possibility of living otherwise. In that vein, poet, independent scholar, and activist Alexis Pauline Gumbs, in the brilliant book called Undrowned, asks the question, what becomes possible when we are immersed in the queerness of forms of life that dominant systems cannot chart, reward, or even understand? Riz, can you reflect on this question in relation to your artistic practice?
Thank you. I will try. Okay, so in my just do the next slide. Thank you so much. So in my artistic practice, I think with aquatic microorganisms, and in particular with cyanobacteria, which are organisms invisible to the human eye, living in oceans and freshwater bodies, where it's often unclear who is water and who is microbe. Around 2.3 billion years ago, cyanobacteria introduced oxygen through photosynthesis, first into the waters and then into the atmosphere, slowly transforming our planetary biosphere from oxygen poor to oxygen rich. Cyanobacteria, therefore, could be considered our most ancient ancestors. And one genus among many in this large and diverse group of microbes is Synecocystis. And since its isolation in 1968, this specific ancestor has been under human captivity in biolabs as a model organism. Synecocystis is seen as a highly valued biological raw material, quotation marks, or as some researchers even like to call them, the new unicellular milk cow for the production of biofuel, bioplastics, biocosmetics, and more. So when I first held Synecocystis in my hands, I had no idea how to care for them. And after many mistakes, I understood that my perception of time in relation to care was biased, to say the least. That care is also not acting. Sorry. In the words of a point emphasized by feminist theorist Maria Puig de la Bella Casa, who states, from the perspective of human non-human relations in technoscience and nature cultures, unproblematic visions of care would not only be meaningless, but could be fatal. So some of the Synecocystis I collaborate with live in a biolab, a highly colonial space, restricted by protocols, jargon, and procedures. Some time ago, tiny fungal dots began to appear on top of some of the Synecocystis. And I was surprised and intrigued, but also frightened by the possible consequences. Because in the context of the biolab, contamination is an undesired introduction of impurities, an unintended presence of the unwanted. And I always wondered about the word contamination and its judgment about belonging, purity, and value. And so I decided to wait. Months passed by, and the white stuff, as I had come to call them, had not become excessive, and there was certainly no exponential growth. On the contrary, some even formed exquisite patterns. I welcomed them as a companion species. So while this was going on, Sylvia Winter's men entered the lab and told me that it needed to be removed, because it is nothing else than contamination. But my stubborn queer self thought of the practices of refusal of Leanne Betes-Amosako Simpson and Alexis Pauline Gums, of Tina Kempt and Saidia Hartman, of Paul Preciado, to name but a few. And again, I decided to wait. Because what the lab protocol refers to as contamination and what I was instructed to neutralize is described by science philosopher Isabelle Stengers as a matter of being obliged to think by what happens. Stengers speaks of the art of paying attention, which is not merely observational but ethical. It resonates with what feminist political scientist Joan Tronto calls the first phase of care, a caring about, in which care begins with attentiveness, with noticing that something or someone matters. To pay attention in that sense is already to be drawn into a relation of response. So I grew increasingly curious as to who the white stuff might be. So I decided to place some on various growth media. Before long, all sorts of life sprouted out in the petri dishes. It was clear that without Synecocystis, without this symbiotic coexistence, the white stuff was a completely different type of microorganism. I see this not only as an appeal that an organism is not inherently toxic or submissive, but also that being in relation turns organisms into other dimensions of what they can become. That the oppressive restrictions of living in isolation reduces organism into a fraction, a derivative. So how then may a stance towards mutual aid instead of the modern cliché of survival of the fittest have oriented dominant knowledges differently towards notions of kinship? Life depends on how each being is affected through the relationships they form. Life depends on bonding and joining and on sintering. So, question for you again. So, Zuleika, how do you think the concept of Simpson sintering can guide us or can guide you in challenging long-standing inequalities and creating more equal futures?
I'll be quick. If sintering is about coming into right relation, then we would first have to acknowledge and accept that we are currently not living in right relation with kin with whom we share the earth. We are out of relation with the life of earth itself. We resist sintering. We prefer what Malcolm Ferdinand terms colonial habitation, the engineering of humans and ecosystems through things like the plantation, the biolab, private ownership of land, and mass exploitation of humans and animals, attempting to force the life of Earth to our will. Because to really see, we would have to acknowledge our dependency on the slave ship, which is now the sweatshop in Bangladesh, the coal mine in the DRC, and the banana plantations in Ecuador. This blindness is what Ferdinand refers to in decolonial ecology as the double fracture, the separation of colonial history from environmental history, coupled with environmentalism's apolitical genealogy of ecology and political ecology's failure to acknowledge race and colonial history. In considering the ways in which we are rematerializing and reconstituting our worlds in the global majority, in creating bonds as the snowflakes do, we would need to be reaching back and reaching forward at the same time. That is to say, returning to our ancestral and communal practices, not in terms of purity, but of becoming former snowflakes, former individual subjects, former citizens. That our values and ethics stem from this enfleshed decolonizing of the self that returns to an understanding of reality as fluid. That we allow ourselves to be guided by the strength of our coalitional ancestry. From my home province of KwaZulu-Natal in South Africa, Mamfikile in Changase, from the Lenca peoples of Honduras, Berta Cáceres, two of the 2,253 land defenders killed with impunity between 2012 and 2025. Coming into right relation means honoring their sacrifice and learning in our own lives and contexts to put into practice their commitment to the life of Earth. That for us, in the global majority, a rematerializing of the land and waters is a reconstituting of ourself as land and waters, a centering, a joining, a bonding that allows us to build coalitions with and across difference. To close, I'm going to be very happy. To close, with Earth raging from the effects of the triple planetary crisis, we've asked ourselves, what can we learn from water's fugitivity and ability to escape capture? In the many forms water takes, ice, liquid, steam, clouds, tears, water shows us that knowledge too takes many forms. Whilst in the global minority, knowledge has become frozen and out of right relation, captured in archives, institutions, and corporations, in the global majority, with indigenous and non-Western ways of knowing and being, knowledge is more fluid and often in right relation, in fleshed, embodied archives that survive through oral tradition. When it comes to notions of kinship with our common ancestor cyanobacteria, for example, we find in the global majority cyanobacteria is honored as kin, whilst in the global minority is dishonored as raw material to be reduced and extracted from. Sintering, another form of water, teaches us reciprocal care. To surrender to slow deformation, to allow for bonds to be formed in ways that avoid universalizing truths. The fugitive nature of water is a reminder to keep moving towards each other and the life of Earth, to not stay within the comfort of neat categories, but to transgress disciplinary and societal boundaries, even if that means making a big splash, hoping the ripple effects of which can be felt by generations to come. That the only way out of this triple planetary crisis is meaningfully building new constellations of co-resistance. Thank you very much. Gracias.
Thank you so much, Risk and Zuleika. Don't go away just yet. We've gone a bit over, but yes, but maybe if someone has one burning question, just to let you know, this is being live streamed, but only this part is being recorded. So if you want to ask a question and you prefer not to, be identified, then don't mention your name. But if not, we would love to know who you are as well. But anyone with a question? Okay, great. We'll have a lot to discuss. So yes, swiftly moving on to Amitangshu, who will continue in some ways with contamination, pollution, purity, and
it's completely scrambled. What? No, see? It's got scrambled. Yeah. Anyways, yeah, slide aesthetics. Hello, everyone. I'm not sure how to continue after this. But I want to thank Risk and Zuleika for a very immersive and a very inspiring presentation. Thank you so much. That was beautiful. I loved it. Now, so as I was saying, consider this presentation to be the dark space between stars as you gaze in the sky. But I want to start off, and in many ways this presentation intersects with the things that Zuleika and Riz talked about, and with the presenters also coming after me. Obak Jolpan, a strange drink of water. And I want to start by telling you a story by Shukumar Ray, the person on the screen, the man on the screen. And I will jump from there to a water purifier. But let's start with the story. Now, people growing up in the Bengal Delta are mostly familiar with Shukumar Ray's writing, because we have in schools, for example, especially in West Bengal, in the Indian side, we grow up performing many of his plays in school. And Obak Jolpan, or a strange drink of water, is one of them. Just to give you the story in a nutshell, a man walks into a village on a hot day like this, very thirsty, and is looking for a glass of water or some water to drink. But in that village, every person he encounters is willing to talk to him about everything except offer him water. So he meets the first person who tells him, water, what kind of water? There is water that comes from the eyes, that are tears. There's water when you salivate looking at food, that comes from your mouth. There is water inside a coconut shell. So there are various different kinds of water, right? So, but he doesn't offer him water. So he goes around the entire village, and there's a chemistry teacher who explains to him the chemical formula of water and its structure. And finally, he has to cheat his way out of it by asking someone to show him what water looks like, and they give him water in a glass, and he quickly drinks it, and he says, this is a village of lunatics, and he runs away. Now, why do I bring this story forward in political ecology of water? Is that there is a tension between discourse and the material world. And we need to keep in mind that what Sukumar Ray was doing in the 19th century was poking fun at the Bengali colonial middle class that was produced out of colonial modernity, that, hey, there's a lot of discussion, debate, and discourse, but what about the material world that lies outside? How do you engage with that? He was basically also, it was a satire, and satire, by the way, is a wonderful way to bring critical thinking into the public realm. So now, Obak Jolpan is a starting point to my thinking around the materiality of water and the difference or the discreteness between the materiality of water and the way we think about water. Why so? The next image will hopefully explain. Every year in India, this image flashes across multiple screens. This is Chhat Puja, a Hindu ritual largely in the northern and eastern part of the country, which is a form of nature worship, where women and men of the Hindu faith immerse themselves in water while praying to the sun. So it's a form of nature worship. But I think you can see in the image what's happening here. This is Yamuna in the state of Delhi, the capital of the country, the most polluted river in the world. The toxic cocktail in this river includes volatile organic compounds, surfactants, agricultural runoff, chemical waste, and huge amounts of fecal coliform, that is almost 200 times over the WHO recommendation. What I'm showing here is a far more subdued version of this because people immerse themselves in it. They rub the foam on their bodies. So then I'm thinking, what is it that produces this disconnect between your embodied understanding of pollution? Because every year people come out of this and they have skin rashes and itches and other kinds of skin ailments. But yet, every year this happens over and over again. So then the question I have is, what produces this? And I feel that some of these realities of South Asia, or in many cases the majority world, needs to be also understood in some of the intellectual debates and traditions that have taken place in these landscapes, because this is not a tabula rasa. These debates have happened in these geographies in the past. And what does it tell us to help us engage with these questions that we encounter? Can we really take a secularized view of this as idiots who don't understand science? Or is there some other way of engaging with this? And this takes me back to 1,800 years. This debate between spirit and matter in Indian philosophy has encountered significant contestations. And unfortunately, what we have today is a more hegemonic imposition of a Brahminical order that situates itself in the Vedantic or the Advaita Vedantic traditions. The difference between the two is that while we always talk about Hinduism in the sense of Advaita Vedanta, almost 1800 years ago, there were other schools that criticized, challenged, and negated and rejected the authority of the Vedas. And this was the The debate was between the Astic schools who accepted the primacy of the Vedas and the Nastic schools who rejected the primacy of the Vedas. And the Nastic school of, you would be familiar with the Shamanic school, the Buddhism and Jainism is known mostly. There are other schools as well. The other one that I want to refer today is Lokayata, or people's philosophy, that emerges almost 1800 years ago, which challenges Brahminical orthodoxy with its own heterodoxy. It's empirical, it is materialist, and it also rejects, for example, some of these key tenets, the existence of a transcendental soul. And for it, compared to orthodox Brahmanism, which takes the body as a site of impurity, the body is a vessel in which the soul is situated, the body is just a container, while the pursuit of a higher consciousness is the higher order of knowledge. And that establishes Brahminical understanding of society to be superior than knowledge produced through bodily labor. The Lokayata rejects that. The Lokayata says the body is the site of production of knowledge. The body is in relation with nature. Nature, and the term they use is fermentation. Different forms of matter constantly engage and build relationships to produce the physical senses, and the body is a way to recognize, understand, and live with those senses. So knowledge is produced through that embodied understanding with the material world. It is not it is not disconnected from it. It is actively engaged with it, and the material world is constantly in a state of flux. It is constantly interacting and producing new realities and new meanings. So even identities change based on those meanings as well. So quickly summarizing this debate and putting some of them up here is that perception is considered pratyaksha or empiricism, the fact that perception is the source of knowledge. They do not believe the concept of God does not exist in this form of thinking, and by rejecting the notion of a transcendental soul, where the acts of a particular life then translate and get distilled into corporeal shape in the next life, which is setting in motion the caste system, it also rejects caste, and it also questions the hierarchy between men and women, because the Brahminical orthodoxy puts women immediately lower down the hierarchy by seeing the body of the woman as a site of impurity. So these challenges to the Brahminical orthodoxy and this debate between spirit and matter, I believe, would be useful for us to understand when we enter into debates on materiality. And then comes the question of, and I just wanted to quickly give due credit to the person who brought Lokayata back into public discourse. Devi Prasad Chattopadhyay was an Indian philosopher and a Marxist philosopher. This book was published by the Communist Party of India in 1960s, and he traces back this debate by looking at how Brahminical orthodox scholars were rejecting the Lokayata as hedonistic, as impure, as people totally involved in the world of Maya. And he recovers a lot of this text and its tenets from those debates. There is an unevenness that we must recognize as those of us who engage with decolonizing scholarship, that even in India, there's an unevenness. If you are writing in English from Delhi, you're cited, you're well known. But if you are teaching in a college in another city or another town, you do not get that recognition. So there is an unevenness to knowledge production within the global south that we also need to acknowledge. And the fact that if this book was published by Stanford University Press, all of you would have known about him. So somehow the validation for decolonization also comes from the metropole, but that's a longer conversation. So how do we bring this conversation of the Lokayata, the understanding of embodied engagement with the non-human world, to the discussion on the water in the political ecology of water? Please don't call this number. This was put up during COVID in my neighborhood, and they promised everything. You can cure anything with water these days. So it talks about monocrystallized alkaline water, and apparently if it's 9.5 pH, it can cure COVID. So yeah. But the point I'm trying to make is these are the new questions of materiality that are emerging in the water sector also. For those of you who are not aware of it, King's College London, anyone from King's College here? Okay. Had a study where they asked the public utilities to put lithium in the public water supply to lower rates of suicide in the UK. Yes, so that's a published paper, by the way. So, so these questions of material, and then you also realize how these politics around water quality emerge in certain spaces. The fluoride controversy in the US with this whole debate around taking fluoride out of it. Many things to discuss on that. But all this discussion on water in the political ecology of water has kind of talked about its flows as a vector, a hybrid quasi-object, flow and flux, sink, stuff, and the distinction between H2 and water that is well established in political ecology of water, so I shall not get into the details of it. But when you bring these, can you make a conversation possible? So my way to make that conversation happen is through this. How many of you, how many of you have seen this contraption? Can I have a quick show of hands? Okay, oh wow, okay, that's a big number. Because you cannot escape this if you're in many parts of the global south. I'm not just saying India, if you're in Korea, in Thailand, in Japan, you will find these filters. Most of them are membrane-based filters. And these filters have become a part of urban middle-class life in India. Why? That was my question. I wanted to understand why is it that, yes, everybody has a water filter, but why this specific kind of filter is what I was interested in, and I was coming into this debate from an STS perspective. And though the presence of this contraption has been normalized in India, the controversy erupts in 2019, 2020, when the National Green Tribunal of India bans the use of this in all areas supplied by municipal water. Why is that so? Because if you run 100 liters of water through this, you'll get 40 liters of potable water which has been demineralized and 60 liters of wasted brine that is thrown out. That has all the minerals that has been pushed into it, increasing its concentration. So as a result, it was critiqued on the basis of the waste it produces, not essentially on the relation between body and minerals in water. That's a whole terrain that is not researched very well. But how do you normalize these artifacts that's producing this kind of waste and bring a new articulation of water into your lives is taking place through these meters. So yesterday, Tanvi's presentation on the electrical conductivity meters, the EC meters, this is the TDS meter. TDS is total dissolved solids, and it measures all the non-organic and organic matter in a given volume of water. Now, how did this contraption become so important is that there is an inherent suspicion of this technology. Is it working? Is it not working? How do you know that? This works as a thermometer that nobody knows how to read, except that what is told to you by the people who sell you this. So when they sell you these tools, they tell you that the lower, the better. So if you reduce it to below 50, it's considered to be a sign of purity. I'm not saying that you don't need water filters in large parts of the global south. There are concerns with public water supply. There's no doubt about it. But there are ways of purifying water. There are ways of filtering it. Why are we looking at this hyper-extractive technology so normalized in urban life is the question that I'm trying to answer. And not only is this normalized to this kind of market-enabling matrix of the TDS meter, but from my field side, you also realize that technology allows for the interaction of matter in water to make it more visible. If you look at this filter here, this is an ultrafiltration unit that is outside, deliberately kept in transparent plastic. So that when the user looks at this, what the user is saying, this is talking a lot to you, looking at contamination, but it is just water's material content. Right? It has got sulfates, carbonates, it has got different kinds of metal. There could be some of them could be harmful, but this way, some of them, I mean, we don't know really, because there's a difference in the way the body engages with calcium carbonate compared to calcium sulfate. So what produces kidney stones depends on the kind of salts. The machine doesn't distinguish. Really? Okay. Sorry. I'm actually an organizer of this. I should be ashamed. So yeah, and I also want to talk a little bit about the reason I talked about, the Brahminical orthodoxy. As a Brahmin man in India, when I engage with the field, I have tremendous access. I can go into people's homes, I can go into the municipal office, I have unlimited access to archives, I can work my way around this. Few years ago, a student of mine, a Dalit student, tried to study urban municipal process in India. No one would give him an interview, and he had to go back and study the village communities where he was a part of. So this is the reality we deal with, and we need to acknowledge this. And I just want a quick hat tip to Rohan is not here. When I started researching, I wanted to study this in the rural areas or in the urban areas, and Rohan D'Souza told me, Amitangshu, you're a Brahmin man with privilege. Go and study the middle classes and see what they're up to. Don't go and waste the time of poor people. So I did that, and I'm very happy I did, because these are the things that we need to study more. The privilege, the middle classes, they're escaping scrutiny in large parts of the global south. So, if you were to look at this case study, my argument here is that we can bring the Lokayata tradition with the discussion, and many of the traditions that are happening in Lokayata already speaking to a lot of literature that's coming from feminist political ecology. There is a conversation already happening there. The question is, can we then, and this is my proposition, look at water as constellation of matter? So bear with me as I say why I am proposing this is because by looking at this, we also realize that the politics of water quality is changing. If you look at what's happening here, this is promising you vegetarian water. Okay? Now you see what it's kind of relating with. It is promising a certain kind of worldview to find a material technological form, right? And there are many such, there are more and more of these coming into play. So my question is, how do we engage with politically, how do we understand middle class technopolitics in the urban south in terms of the materiality of water is something that we might be able to look at by looking at the political outcomes of water's internal heterogeneity and the relationship between time and place in shaping the materiality of water. So, in conclusion, matter in water engenders a continued history of commodification, whether through vilification or valorization. Please remember, if you go out and buy a bottle of San Pellegrino, it has 900 TDS of water, you will happily pay, like, €5 for it. But that would basically, in India, mean that water is undrinkable. How do we create that? By valorizing it here and vilifying it in the global south. So recognizing the internal heterogeneity of water opens new areas of interrogation to politics of addition and subtraction of matter in drinking water. The lithium debate, the fluoride debate, we need to re-engage with them and understand what's happening in that sphere. And the control over what is desired and undesired in drinking water supplies facing urban water governance in a bifurcated domain. Most of the people drinking water in the global south has moved to the private realm by getting private purifiers. They're no longer dependent on the state to provide safe drinking water. It has serious public governance ramifications politically. And how do we think through that? By looking at the political ecology of water, by rematerializing, is the question I put forward to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Amit. If anyone has a couple of questions, also if you've had a chance by now to digest the amazing presentation of Zuleika and Risk, and you have questions pertaining to that, but maybe 2 or 3 very quick questions. Yes, there's one here.
Just a very small invitation to study forever chemicals and PFAS water in Belgium and Netherlands. It's really invitation. Yeah.
I mean, that conversation has to happen across north and south. Absolutely, yes.
Hello, I'm Paulina. I am based at IVM at VU Amsterdam. This will be a question to Amitangshu, but I am thinking, so don't you worry. I was just wondering, and it's a bit of a classic question. But how do we end up in a situation where we allow for the creation of this narrative that a certain percentage, let's say, of sodium is okay and a certain isn't. I want to understand the situation in India. Is there a vacuum that is then filled in, for example, by private companies that offer these different measurements and or purifiers? What's the story there?
Thanks, Paulina. Yes, so quickly responding to that, the understanding of water quality standards is not very much in the public domain. In fact, the TDS meter in much of the context is an understanding of water quality for many people. So all the municipalities go by WHO benchmarks in supplying water, but they know what those benchmarks are. But there's a larger question of science on how these benchmarks are created. Is it place-based or how is it universalized? There are places where people are used to drinking very high TDS water without any historical problems of kidney stones and other ailments. So how do you then explain that? And that has led to some modifications in the standard at policy level. But for users, this is the domain where a lot of these tools come in. And for example, the EC meter and the TDS meter are two of them. TDS meter is one of the most widely used ways by people to understand contamination in water. So yeah, so there is a vacuum.
All right, do you have a question? Ah, okay, okay. So
Later, I have more questions. Is it fused? And then in the middle,
okay, I think we can start now with Muna Dahani.
Is that okay? Yeah. Is it okay if I say it? Hi everyone, thank you so much Amit Hangashu and Tanvi also for putting together this really excellent panel. I've been learning a lot and of course engaging with all the new colleagues, so it's really a pleasure. Thank you everyone also for being here. So today I'm presenting a work in progress still that I am collaborating on with my colleague Saurabh Arora, who's at the University of Sussex, who unfortunately could not be with us today, but I'll relay any questions or feedback you have, particularly on the India case, which I'll be presenting on his behalf. So our paper is titled Rain World: Struggles for Decolonial Flourishing and the Multiplicity of Being, Knowing and Making with Rainwater. Okay, and I'll start here with a poem by Mahmoud Darwish. And for those of you who are not familiar with Mahmoud Darwish, he's one of the prolific names. He's like the national poet of Palestine, and his writing has been very powerful for our national liberation movement. So I leave you to kind of read it slowly. Maybe I'll read it in Arabic because I feel it's also important. So Mahmoud Darwish, نهر يموت من العطش. The title is A River Dies of Thirst. كان نهر هنا وله ضفتان وأم سماوية أرضعته السحاب المقطر. نهر صغير يسير على مهله نازلا من أعالي الجبال يزور القرى والخيام كضيف لطيف خفيف ويحمل للغور أشجار دفلة ونخل ويضحك للساهرين على ضفتيه. اشربوا لبن الغيم واسقوا الخيول وطيروا إلى القدس والشام. كان يغني فروسية مرة وهوى مرة. كان نهر له ضفتان وأم سماوية أرضعته السحاب المقطر. لكنهم خطفوا أمه فأصيب بسكتة ماء ومات على مهله عطشا. So Mahmoud Darwish, A River Dies of Thirst, presents a river which, for those of us living in Bilad al-Sham, know that it's the Jordan River, or what we refer to and know as Nahr Shri'a. Not merely as a part of the landscape or a line on a map, but a living being whose existence depends on an intimate relation with land, between rain, clouds, and the communities it sustains. The river is portrayed as generous, life-giving, nourishing villages, trees, animals, and human connections across the land. However, as we have, many of us know, and I'm sure many of you can predict, this river today has been almost completely killed and is a cesspit. And here is what Mahmoud Darwish, even in those days, refers to as kidnapping the mother. severing the river from the clouds that feed it, and also from the communities that used to thrive on its banks due to the Nakba, or the Palestinian catastrophe, that is still ongoing. It's a structure, not an event. The river's slow and painful death becomes a powerful metaphor for the deliberate denial of life through the control and denial of water, a violent control that Israel has been imposing on the indigenous Palestinian population. We see it violently resurfacing with monstrous levels in the ongoing genocide in Gaza, where the weaponization of water has reached levels that we have unprecedented level, and where people are still struggling until this day to have enough water to drink, sometimes having to queue every day for hours, not even knowing if they will get their share of water. Israel has also engineered the spread of famine and hunger, and has caused widespread environmental destruction with the ecocide it has ushered again on the indigenous communities of Palestine. So all of this devastating not only on human life, but also on the ecological and cultural world that sustain Palestinian presence on the land. I wanted to connect my laptop because I wanted to include another haunting work entitled, but I cannot, I'm just gonna maybe explain it to you. In a haunting work entitled The Thirst March, Ismail Shammout, one of Palestine's leading modernist painters, vividly visualizes the thirst enacted upon Palestinians like himself on their exodus from their home during the 1948 Nakba, or catastrophe, where 700,000 Palestinians were forcibly expelled from their cities. I'll leave this here for you, towns and villages. In his testimony of this arduous journey from his hometown of Lid, Shammout tells the story of how he was desperately trying to fetch water for his mother, who was unable to walk anymore as she was thirsty and weak on this exodus towards the unknown. His familiarity with the hills surrounding Lid have led him to find a well and filled his jug. The Israeli soldiers drops the jug to the ground, and the scene painted is one of desperation for the few drops that many thirsty bodies yearn for, in a very haunting kind of image of what also has been experienced by many Palestinians in Gaza as well. I will just show it here quickly, sorry, because I wanted to include it last minute. You can see it. But that is the painting. Okay. So going back to, okay. So this presentation builds on this growing debate that we've already heard a lot about from my previous colleagues, but also in this conference in general with many, different political ecology scholars who have really spearheaded a lot of advancement in the field. I'm not going to name people per se, but political ecologists have long argued that water is not simply an object of abstraction, but an active agent and force in co-constituting socio-natural relations, whose materiality shapes social and ecological outcomes through dynamic interaction between humans and non-human actors. And we have talked a lot in different debates about how it helps us to expose and sharpen our understanding of power of power and environmental change. But it also remains limited in capturing the cumulative socio-ecological transformation produced through centuries of colonial conquest and dispossession that I know many scholars around the world now are tending to, like you have both mentioned as well. Similarly, the concepts such as racial capitalism, settler colonialism illuminate enduring structures of domination, but often pay less attention to the material culture through which colonial violence continues reshaping socio-ecological worlds in many parts of our world. So we also need to continue to fully engage with the colonial and indigenous understanding of coloniality and the implications of thinking about and with water. Water, as Tanvi was mentioning in the introduction, is never singular. It exists in multiplicity, exists in different material forms, carries multiple meanings, and is constituted through diverse ontologies and epistemologies, like many indigenous scholars, like Leanne Simpson, Yazi and Baldi, and non-indigenous scholars as well have highlighted. So we draw on the concept of colonial modernity to direct our attention not only to institutions and economies, but also to infrastructure, the technologies and ecological relation through which colonial power becomes materially organized. Understanding that colonial modernity is a globalizing formation that is enabling the genocide that we have been witnessing and Palestinians have been enduring since October 2023. So responding to this call to rematerialize political ecology from majority world perspective, we ask what becomes visible if we center the rain, not simply as precipitation or hydrological input, but as a material relation through which communities enact distinct ways of being, knowing, and making. And what happens also when we know that rain is being colonized or taken away. So our intervention is bringing these conversations together. Hopefully, as it is work is in progress, we appreciate also reflections. So let me begin with a vignette that captures some of the dynamics and some of the stories I want to say. So in 2023, Israel inaugurated what it described as the world's first national carrier flow reversal project. The project pumps desalinated water produced along the Mediterranean shores and along the Mediterranean coast, approximately 150 kilometers inland to replenish the Sea of Galilee, or what we know as Buhayrat Tabariya, designed to transfer around 120 million cubic meters of water annually in an attempt to address the high salinity in Lake Tiberias and the dropping of the levels of the lake to what they call not the red line, but the black line. Of course, the reason for is never mentioned, right? So who knows also Palestine would know that Israel has also enacted in the 1950s and has constructed one of its largest infrastructural projects, moving water from the tributaries of the Jordan River, which are in Jordan and Syria, and carried out the first and only out-of-basin transfer of water. And that's why this project is called Reverse, because Israel has done the opposite 50 years ago by pumping water out of the basin to realize a settler colonial project and make the desert bloom. So this infrastructural feat that is like Deborah Cohen refers to as an archive of dispossession. All of these critical infrastructure that is led by settler colonial states are archives of dispossession that I've published about in different work. But what is important here is that blind modernism that really guides Zionist settler colonial project in Palestine, the blind kind of belief in infrastructure and technology. So standing beside the infrastructure while being interviewed by Reuters, the senior manager in Israeli from the national water company Mekorot, a very vicious company that has been operating even before the Nakba in terms of extracting Palestinian water exclusively for Jewish and settlers settlement expansion, reflected on this reverse project and said, and I quote, "With this environment of climate changes, you don't know what to expect next year and the year afterwards," he said. "We are no longer depending on rain, basically, for water supply." So I found this statement, of course, not very surprising, but very much captures the coloniality of modern water. The extraction that happens from our streamways, from our river, our rain, and then the disposability that follows when other alternatives emerge. So since its establishment, the settler colonial project has transformed and exploited rivers, aquifers, and transformed waterscapes through these large-scale infrastructure that I don't have a lot of time to speak about, but this was the original national water carrier that is now in reverse. So for Palestinians, this colonial modernity meant erasing grain world from the Nakba, and that I explain now what ramifications it had for severing relations with land and water and memory, to the material and legal infrastructure that are still in place today, dictating Palestinian water access. I stop here at the 1959 water law, because here it is the first law where rainwater itself became state property, effectively erasing centuries of indigenous water governance and customary practices. The weaponization of water and deprivation of water is enacted in multiple ways in Palestine, where we see springs that Palestinians use to survive Israel's enforced imposed dispossession is by Israel cementing springs and cementing cisterns or destroying these cisterns that hundreds of communities depend on because that Israel denies them access to a water network. So here I think of colonizing of the rain that Ariana Tosi and other colleagues have written about in India, particularly because they talked about colonizing the rain, and I found it to be what happens here in terms of what they refer to as a contested project, whereby certain water worlds become present and real, while other discarded and less real. I take you here to another location, another occupied geography that is rarely spoken about, which is the occupied Syrian Golan Heights, and take you particularly, and I'll not be able to talk a lot about it because I know the 5 minutes probably is coming soon. But in the occupied Golan Heights, or what we refer to in Arabic as the Jawlan, Israeli restrictions on water access formed part of a broader strategy of accumulation by dispossession, as the Golan Heights is a very strategic lies on a very strategic location and is also rich in natural resources. So when the Jawlanis were denied access to water and when they saw their local lake being taken away from them by Mekorot and they were denied access to it, they began mobilizing and building their own water infrastructure. And it was started with rainwater collection pools that they have developed. Then it developed into these rainwater harvesting tanks. So the Jawlani community intensified collective agricultural practices and constructed of hundreds of these cylindrical metal rainwater reservoirs. And at that time, it happened in the middle of the night where the Israeli police patrol went away and people started building them. So the next morning when it comes up, a few more have been built in the 1980s. Often as well in direct defiance to Israeli water regulation, where they first faced threats of confiscation or destruction of these cisterns and also fines. But this materialized a refusal to let go of rainwater world. As one farmer explained, this land is ours and we will not abandon it. If it needs water, we will provide it and quench its thirst. So rain here becomes an enabler of material practices of resistance and refusal through which land, water, and community are continually reassembled against colonial attempts at fragmentation and erasure. We're coming, yeah. But I also want to say if we only recognize, or if we only understand these practices and these infrastructure as acts of resistance and alone, we are also cognizant that we risk allowing colonialism to define the horizon of our existence. Rain worlds are not simply reactions to settler colonial violence, they precede it, endure through it, and just gesture beyond it. And this is where I come to the Injasa pear-shaped cisterns. This is work that I've been doing with my dear friend and brilliant researcher, Dana Masad, on Injasa. And Injasa in Arabic means the pear-shaped cisterns. And cisterns here bring us closer to what we want to say about indigenous infrastructure preceding, enduring through, and transcending settler colonial hegemony over time and space. So this centuries-old technology of capturing rainwater relies on intimate, sophisticated, reciprocal, and ingenious knowledge of the land, where Palestinians and other indigenous communities in Bilad al-Sham, our region in the Levant, have developed these Injasa cisterns. And you can see the research we've done on it. This construction embodies accumulated understanding of rainfall, geology, topography, soil, and seasonal water cycle. Their maintenance depend upon collective labor, care, and intergenerational transmission of this embodied knowledge. So it materializes an entire way of being, knowing, and making rain, rather than existing only, again, like I said, in opposition to colonial power. So it reminds us that colonial modernity has never fully displaced worlds, multiple worlds, it's thought to erase. And I come to India. If you give me a few minutes, I want to give it justice. But although I know I have all the Indian scholars in the room, so I cannot really say very much. And this is on Saurabh, so of course we can talk to him as well later. So rainwater irrigation tanks in South India also propelled Saurabh to think together with me around these traditional rainwater irrigation, rainwater harvesting infrastructure and technologies. So we also examined the traditional rainwater irrigation tanks and lake in South India, as they show also community managed infrastructure that also transcends the colonial time and space, capture of time and space. As the slides show, there are hundreds of thousands of rainwater tanks or lakes in South India. And what we really want to say here is that we want to understand them as being marginalized, these initiatives and technologies as marginalized by British colonial forces that privileged, and this is all has been discussed before, but the idea of privileging certain knowledges and certain worldviews, promoting private property over irrigation commons, prioritizing canal and well irrigation, and pronouncing state rights over these water. But they're also shaped by post-colonial conditions of the modern nation state that also adopted the hydraulic mission. And thirdly, it also kind of alerts us to how access to such tanks is shaped by pre-colonial conditions of caste privilege, which again, my colleagues here know much more about. So I'm gonna finish, yes, yeah, okay, that's great. Oh, sorry. So another thing that maybe we didn't have the chance to talk about, that also there's, like we're also interested in how these technologies are coming back to the surface in places like Palestine for reasons I've mentioned here, because these cisterns become these sites where international aid agencies want to circumvent Israeli kind of denial of infrastructural development, and in order to make themselves legible, like, how do you say, legitimate, they start investing a lot in these rainwater harvesting technologies as a way to increase water availability for Palestinians. Similar things might be also showing in the case of India, where reviving and renewing these rainwater irrigation tanks is seen to be strengthening climate adaptation and resilience. This interest tends to situate the cisterns and tanks in the modern world as akin to modern technology. So such situating we see in the modern is seen as this effective way to challenge this colonial treatment of difference. Like this is a traditional ancestral world-making practices and bringing it closer to the modern world. So instead of seeing it as inferior or exotically romanticized. However, such situating comes with a limitation as we see it. In rejecting colonial difference, it ends up neglecting the radical ontological difference of those world-making practices. Many worlds made and are sustained by colonized and indigenous people are thus conflated with the globally dominant modern world. So to conclude, thinking with rain for both of us allows us to move beyond critiques of modern water only towards a rich understanding of its alternatives. Ultimately, our invitation is not simply to think about rain as another form of water, but to, like the Israelis, for example, think about it, but to think with rain as a guide to the plurality of socio-ecological worlds that continue to survive, flourish, and imagine futures beyond colonial modernity. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Muna. The 20 minutes is going by so quickly. I'm sorry, I hate to be that person. Any quick questions for Muna? Okay, I think everybody's just giving people so much food for thought that there will be a very rich exchange after Mickey's presentation. So, Mickey Brigham.
All right. Hello, everyone. I am truly humbled to be alongside a panel with these comrades. I suppose this makes me the final presenter of the conference, so no pressure. I'm a master's student from North Carolina State University. This has been my first academic conference, and it's been so generative to learn from you all, so I thank you.
I would not be here without the unending support of my partner Claire, who chose to be here with us on her 25th birthday. I love you. I'm really grateful for this opportunity to share my reflections on the Yesa Tribunal, which I see as a model for rematerializing water. This research has been a collaboration with my co-author, Dr. Madhusudan Katti, director of the Science, Technology, and Society program at NC State. He could not be here, but sends his solidarity. Before I begin, I want to spend some time discussing my positionality. This has rightfully been a recurring topic of discussion this week. I am a white man of European descent living in an imperialist settler colony, which tomorrow will shamelessly celebrate its 250th year. Yet, this place I call home has been home to indigenous peoples for tens of thousands of years, and the land longs for an end to the colonial occupation. My university is a land-grant institution, or as Madhu would more accurately refer to it, a land-grab institution. This means that it was established on funds directly sourced from the violent expropriation of indigenous peoples' homelands. This map shows the land that was stolen to establish NC State under an executive action of Abraham Lincoln in 1862. I highly recommend visiting this website to learn more about this. So my connection to this work has been formed through shared struggle, interpersonal relationships, and connection with the land and waters of what is now known as North Carolina. Madhu and I have spent the last few years working on different projects with the indigenous organization 7 Directions of Service, who organized this tribunal of which Madhu was a participant. In order to build an analytical framework grounded in the lived experience shared in the tribunal testimony, we chose to use Sharmaz's method of constructivist grounded theory. This method necessitates that we as researchers do not attempt to separate ourselves from the analysis, as colonial methods would insist of us, but rather build an awareness of our own positionalities and biases to understand how they influence our findings. I do not speak for the indigenous people who lead this struggle, but seek to amplify their message and give institutional support to their work. In his absence, Madhu has encouraged me to share some of his own positionality as an immigrant originally from India who lives and works in the United States. He, like so many racialized people and non-citizens in the US, does not have the privilege of traveling internationally. Even with legal immigration status, leaving the country is extremely precarious under the Trump administration. So I will do my best to present our work on my own. Now, to begin, I understand water's materiality to mean simply what is water, or what do we understand water to be? This is an important question that we should all reflect on. What is water to you? Many of us would say it is a resource, something to be used and managed, or that it is an ecosystem full of life forms that provide important services to society and thus should be conserved. The billionaires would say it is natural capital, property that can be privatized to generate profit. Capitalism compels us to understand water as an object and to relate to it strictly through use. We use water, whether for common necessities like hydration, hygiene, and food systems, or for industrial purposes like manufacturing, energy production, and cooling data centers. This objectification of water is institutionalized in law and governance, which treat water frequently as private property that can be owned, bought, and sold. Resource management frameworks seek to quantify and efficiently distribute water among the different sectors of society. Even environmental law, which may appear protective, frequently reinforces this objectification, establishing acceptable levels of pollution and harm. Water is diverted, dammed, polluted, commodified, and consumed to accommodate human activity. Extraction and encroachment interrupt natural aquatic cycles and damage ecosystems, driving floods and droughts, social crisis, and extinction. These frameworks give way to extractive projects like the Mountain Valley Pipeline, or MVP. MVP is an ongoing project in the expansion of fossil fuel infrastructure in the US South, a region that has been characterized by industry as a sacrifice zone, an area of hyper-exploitation, both of natural resources and human labor. Nearly 500 kilometers long, MVP transports fracked methane gas across multiple states, crossing through thousands of rivers, streams, and wetlands. We can see their objective on the map: to expand fracked gas markets into the south from the shales of the northern Appalachian Mountains. It is no coincidence they named it MVP, which in the US normally stands for Most Valued Player. To them, the pipeline is truly that. Since its inception, MVP has faced widespread opposition from communities along its route due to concerns that it will severely pollute the environment, damage community health, and further entrench reliance on fossil fuels. Pipelines are well known to leak and explode, posing a significant and inevitable risk of contamination to the water that communities, both human and more than human, live with and depend on. For the indigenous communities along the route, MVP also threatens sacred places and the relational responsibilities with land and water that are the foundation of life. At the center of the MVP struggle in North Carolina is the Haw River, named for the Sissipahaw people who have inhabited this place for millennia, a home to diverse and abundant life. More broadly, MVP represents one of the latest and most obtrusive developments in a long history of extractivism rooted in the intersecting logics of capitalism and settler colonialism, which continue to dispossess indigenous people and objectify nature for exploitation. While the struggle against MVP has brought together diverse coalitions of communities across racial and cultural lines, the movement is rooted in indigenous cosmology and practices of cultural organizing, which have reframed the conflict from a matter of environmental regulation to a deeper question of responsibility and justice. Environmental justice scholarship documents how extractive infrastructure is routinely cited along a so-called path of least resistance, targeting rural, impoverished, and politically marginalized communities where developers anticipate limited opposition. MVP follows this pattern, reflecting the broader colonial notion that lands and peoples are expendable where political power is weakest. Yet, this assumption collapsed in practice. Rather than acquiesce, affected communities mobilized resistance and built a coordinated, sustained movement across multiple states. Communities used a combination of tactics, from documenting and reporting hundreds of environmental violations to chaining themselves to construction equipment. Their militant and steadfast resistance delayed the pipeline's operation for around 10 years, costing investors billions and forcing the route to shift multiple times. Communities also made legal interventions. Seven Directions of Service, an indigenous-led organization based in the Occaneechi Band of the Saponi Nation, a small tribe in the Piedmont of North Carolina, introduced rights of nature legislation to protect the rivers threatened by MVP. These bills would recognize the rights and personhood of the Haw and Dan rivers, who the Occaneechi have lived with for centuries. Drawing from their cosmology and history, they adapt and apply rights of nature frameworks to specific legal and political contexts. The bills also recognize the Occaneechi's relationship with the river and the colonial history of genocide and displacement. As may have been expected from North Carolina's reactionary political machine, which favors industry over all else, these bills did not pass. As the state stonewalled these reforms, the federal government took dramatic measures to push MVP forward. After years of organized resistance and with the project stalled due to non-compliance with environmental regulation, Congress and President Biden passed the Fiscal Responsibility Act in 2023, sweeping legislation that effectively approved all remaining permits and stripped courts of their jurisdiction to challenge the pipeline. Here we see how a legal system that objectifies nature, disregards people, and prioritizes profit will contradict itself in a bipartisan effort to accommodate extractivism. The passage of this act signaled that formal democratic channels were closed. If the state would take extraordinary measures to ensure the pipeline's completion, then resistance would have to move toward a different source of authority. So, in the summer of 2024, movement leaders from tribes across Turtle Island, or North America, gathered near the headwaters of the Haw River for the Yesa Tribunal, where they heard testimony from communities impacted by MVP. One by one, tribunal participants took the stand, speaking on behalf of nature and sharing long histories of relations that tie them to the land. Testimony moved between accounts of ecological devastation, stories of community resistance, spiritual insights, and calls to action. This was the world's first indigenous-led tribunal on the rights of nature, tasked with modeling an alternative form of justice grounded in indigenous cosmology, ecocentrism, and collective well-being. It platformed land defenders and knowledge holders marginalized by industry and the colonial state as they sought accountability and redress for their communities and the lands and waters they live with. This is Madhu here, a reconciliation ecologist who testified to the ontological limitations of the assumed separation between humans and nature that has been solidified through centuries of privileging Western science over traditional knowledge. The tribunal was a political, cultural, and spiritual intervention. It took shape as an ethical forum for organizers in impacted communities to speak on their own terms and appeal to wider culture and thinking. Although it was not discussed in such terms, at the center of the tribunal was the question of water's materiality. Testimony reflected on the tension between two different materialities of water, based in starkly different worldviews: water as an object and water as kin. Tribunal participants characterized nature and water as subjects with relations to all living things that extend far beyond material dependence and are rooted in reciprocity. In her opening address, activist and president of the tribunal, Casey Camp-Horanek, contrasted these understandings. What they call nature, when they look out the window, we call relatives that we have relationship with. Participants described nature's agency manifesting through climate change, which they express as the long-prophesied purification, a conscious action of Mother Earth. One participant explained, "The Earth is purifying herself, as she must, because of the harm that humankind has inflicted on her. And she's not prejudiced against her children. She loves us. She wants us to have clean air, clean water, clean earth, because the great mystery set those in place." Another participant added, "Every single pipeline they put up is going to break, because Mama doesn't like it. She's taking care of herself. Earthquakes, tornadoes, hurricanes, what else do you need? She's telling us, if you don't straighten up, I'm going to get rid of you. I have my own things I have to take care of." The tribunal was a space for nature to speak through her more willing relatives, those who live with the land, who speak with and listen to the water, who pay close attention to the changes in natural communities, those who uphold the truth of relation and interdependence between all life. Humans' relationship with nature, as described in the tribunal, is not one of use or extraction, but rather of care and mutual responsibility. Since the beginning of time, water has taken care of humans and upheld her obligations to us. This responsibility must be returned. We must take care of water, treat her with respect, and uphold her integrity. We must protect her health, maintain her flows, and ensure her ability to sustain her human and more than human relatives. This web of relational responsibilities extends to future generations. Participants describe themselves as ancestors to the future and emphasize our obligation to care for the river so that she may in turn care for our descendants. The host organization's name itself, 7 Directions of Service, is a reference to the philosophy found variably in many indigenous cultures of Turtle Island, which holds that all actions should be considered with high regard for the well-being of people 7 generations into the future. Participants of the Yesa Tribunal understood MVP not only as an environmental threat, but also as a rupture in right relation. Extractive development disrupts relational responsibilities among humans and nature materially by physically altering the conditions that make them possible. This process also occurs socially by undermining community sovereignty and concentrating decision-making power in the hands of government and corporations rather than the communities who maintain long-standing relationships with the water and land. As rivers are degraded and power is consolidated, it becomes more and more difficult for the communities to fulfill their obligations to nature. Tribunal participants did not mince words in identifying the factors driving this process of marginalization. It all comes for the sake of capitalism and profits for companies. And the legislators and elected officials allow them to do that, so they can put the money in their own pockets at the sacrifice of communities. The tribunal sought to reverse this process, not by demanding a better management regime or tighter restrictions, but by interrogating the way we think about water. In this way, the tribunal can be understood as a project of rematerializing water. Through their testimony, participants asserted a fundamentally different answer to the question, what is water? They challenged the underlying assumption that water is a resource, object, or form of property, and reaffirmed water as a living being with its own knowledge and agency, a relative with whom humans share obligations and a common future. The significance of this rematerialization is clear when considering the different futures and political possibilities produced by different understandings of water. For instance, tribunal participants rejected market solutions to climate change like carbon capture, characterizing them as false and greenwashed. Quote, Mother Earth is rebelling against the idea of grabbing a breath, calling it carbon, and trying to shove it down into our mother, the Earth. Many of these false solutions have come so that extractive industry can continue to cause the harm that it's doing right now. Here we see how the objectification of water, nature, and life leads to a framing of the climate crisis not as a threat, but as an economic opportunity. When water is rematerialized as kin, however, our focus shifts from use to responsibility, from ownership to relationship, and from the mitigation of harm to the fulfillment of obligations. The significance of the tribunal therefore lies not only in its opposition to the pipeline, but in its attempt to transform the social and political horizons through which environmental conflicts are understood. In this way, the tribunal opened space for alternative forms of governance, justice, and collective life rooted in reciprocity rather than extraction. So, what will it take to repair right relation? How will we institutionalize this alternative materiality of water? How will we enforce and defend the inherent and immutable rights of nature? Tribunal participants were clear that the struggle for nature's sovereignty must go hand in hand with the struggle for indigenous self-determination. Quote, decolonization and upholding the rights of nature means reframing, reshaping, restoring, reclaiming ways of life that do no harm. Our laws as indigenous people, our original structures, our original instructions, must be the center from which we operate and move forward. As extractive industry continues to expand in the context of global climate catastrophe, movements around the world are increasingly turning to frameworks like rights of nature to challenge existing systems of governance. The Yesa Tribunal highlights both the possibilities and the limitations of such approaches. While legal reforms provide important tools for the immediate need of protecting nature, they operate within systems that often remain structured by the very dynamics that movements seek to overcome. As a result, efforts to resist extractivism must navigate the tension between working within existing institutions and transforming them fundamentally. Today, MVP is fully operational, but the fight against proposed extensions into North Carolina continues. Participants of the Yesa Tribunal were explicit that their aims extend beyond halting a single project. While waging local struggles, organizers maintain a deep sense of principle and solidarity that stems from the understanding that everything, all water and people, are connected. They point toward a future in which human and ecological well-being are recognized as being intertwined, and in which the collective dignity of all life is prioritized and protected. The Yesa Tribunal offers one compelling model for rematerializing water and demonstrates that the struggle against extractivism is not only a struggle over land, water, and infrastructure, it is also a struggle over materiality itself, over what water is, and therefore how we ought to live with it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mickey. What I would propose now is if all the speakers could come here, I will arrange some chairs and then we can open the conversation up. Okay, so so Amit had the idea of having like an adda, which is a word from Bengali, but also a lot of other North Indian languages, which is basically a often male space of informal conversation. But hopefully we can expand the idea of the adda and yeah, just have sort of a rambling conversation. Well, the party starts at 8, but obviously no pressure to stay until then. But yeah, perhaps we can start and see how we get on. So, questions?
Thank you. Yeah, first of all, thank you so much for the wonderful presentation. My question is to Amitangshu and to you also, Fatima. And also, like, because I'm from India and these are the reality that I have lived with, so it just evoked a lot of emotion and also like a lot of questions. So your presentation also reminded me of, Kelly Ali's work on the gangs, where she basically separates the idea of purity and cleanliness, one as the material dimension, the other as the spiritual dimension. So this whole question about that river that can cleanse, that cleanses our sin, can very well cleanse itself. So my question is, like, how this sacred framing of the river sometimes can work both ways, right? Sometimes it lets the pollution slide away as long as the river stays symbolically pure. But sometimes it becomes the very reason that people fight to protect it. In many indigenous communities, when in Adivasi communities, when they fight against building dams, they basically are talking about this material dimension so that the spiritual dimension is also gets saved. So how do you see that, like that dimension kind of talking to each other? And on a separate note, on like more on the political economy dimension part, I was also thinking about that how in India the authoritarian governments sometimes use this muscular sacred nationalist framing to often evading responsibility, right? There are many cases where they are very easy on this environmental clearances. So in a way, they are supporting their like this corporate houses who are the reason that the rivers gets polluted. So the question then is like the very reverence is then being used in shielding up exactly the corporate interests that pollution regulations would target. So how do you see the sacred framing, this whole authoritarian discourse and corporate interest all working together?
Thank you. There's one here, and then maybe we start chatting.
I wanted to just link to that and ask a question also to Risk and Zulekha and Amitangshu on what is the gender of water and why is water being gendered? What does that do? Like, how does that travels in neoliberal contexts and Hindu nationalist contexts, right? Okay.
Hi, sorry. De Latina. I'm Gina Cortez Valderrama. Thank you so much for the presentations. I think it has been an incredible format and like the beauty as well of how we can use language in so many different ways to approach others. For me, this is the first time that I engage or have an understanding of the topic and even ask myself about the materiality of water. And I would like to ask whoever wants to respond on your last question on how to institutionalize the materiality of water. Like, first of all, is that something that is desired? And if so, then how would that be? And how would that be by understanding as well the extraterritorial impacts that many of the activities have, and how would that actually work? Because, yeah, I find it interesting. Thank you so much.
Okay, one more question and then we.
Hi, sorry, I couldn't see everyone. Can you see me? Okay. Hi, I'm Farhana. I really enjoyed the presentations, but I felt a little bit of a friction in the way people were using materiality and relationality to water, because there's a long, actually, discussion about materiality, like whether it's particulates, pollutants, and the way it flows, its viscosity, in the way its aqueousness forms certain kinds of relationalities, and it can pollute the body, it can kill the body, it can purify spiritually, but then materially, it can infect the body. So there's all these kinds of longer political ecology traditions. So I don't agree with the guy who said there isn't a longer political ecology tradition on the materiality of water, because there actually is. But then when we think about materiality through relationality, which is the way I think Madhu and you are working on, and others, and also in Palestine and South India, both materiality is relational. It produces this certain kinds of relationships and contestations and kinship. And also, often it's a form of resistance, right? So water becomes a site of resistance. Water's always been about power. So I'm just wondering, like, you know, if you could speak a little bit more about the way, the different understandings and usages of the materiality of water.
In the order of the presenters.
You have the notebook.
Oh, so that was the plan. Give him the notebook and make him answer. Okay. So I'll just try and answer the first two questions which you had posed to me. One was the question of sacredness. So I think it's a very place-based articulation, and I think we need to start unsettling this notion that sacredness could be universal and could apply to all places in a particular way. Just to give you an example, my earlier research was on the sacred landscapes of Sikkim in northeastern India. And here what happened was, when the government went into building dams in northern part of Sikkim, which is mostly inhabited by the Lepchas, the indigenous people of that area, and the Bhutias, they referred to the fact that this was sacred landscape, or Dongzu, and you cannot desecrate land here. So the opposition was so stiff that the government said, okay, you tell us which is the part which is sacred. And the moment they said north is sacred, then the rest of the state was not sacred. So all the dams came up on the rest of the state, right? So how sacred is interpreted and engaged with by the state has its own politics. And I think this is precisely what's happening even in the case of the Hindu nationalist government that we have in place. And so yeah, so that was one. And what else was written? Something here I can't now read. So why don't I pass it on to Zulekha and Risk and Mona to respond?
Go first. Well, do you want to?
Okay, sure.
I can say something. But
Yeah, I think I want to speak, because I'm trying to answer all the questions at once, right? So I will try to make it coherent. I want to address, I guess, the idea of materiality and then the gendering of water at the same time. So one of the questions that I've had in my mind throughout attending the sessions of the conference this week is, what potential is there for us to have conversations across ontological and epistemological lines? So if there is a common dominant epistemological understanding of materiality and of water and spirituality and the sacred, and all these things are separate from each other and they're categorized, what happens when it comes into conversations with those of us who have other ontological and epistemological deep relations with water that have been carried through generations, across oceans, and maintained through oral tradition? And I think having a conversation where that is happening, where, let's say, there's representation from the Lenca people in Honduras, and there's representation from the Zulu people from my home province, like, how different would that conversation be? And also, probably at the beginning, how uncomfortable it would be, right? That language also, and English, is limiting. So in that respect, yeah, English. This is the limitation of how we're interacting with each other. and the language that we choose matters. So, yeah. I hope that adequately covered parts of the question.
I can continue on your thought. I also had to think of Leon Beta Samusaka Simpson, who also says that, and I will sort of connect them with water, that the language in English it is not compatible with the understanding of the self, and I think we all suffer from the English definitions and like how we are seen and called and boxed and categorized. And I think like because Leon Beta Simpson, sorry for always pronouncing the full name, but I really think it's important to pronounce the full name. So they identify as Kwee, and Kwee is a term that is not. I mean, if you go to the language, it could be considered a woman, but it's not, because there is no definition of the woman. So there's like this limitation when we start this conversation about like the gender of water. It is on the one hand, you know, I always say like I'm sort of. I consider myself a they, them, but then I say like I'm sort of she out of solidarity, because I you know, like how can you not be a she? Like what would happen if I would go in transition? You know, like I would be, yeah, that's complicated. That's a political thing. So, and I think there is a lot of trouble, but I love this conversation and I will not say too much about it, but I think like we need other languages, yeah.
I'm also going to try to say something. Hopefully, it will address some questions that were asked. But I think in our context, which is that context of world ending, that very much is around kind of creating conditions of uninhabitability, with water being a very important a resource to deny, to kind of end all life, right? I think here a lot about how in our kind of work as Palestinian scholars, we're trying to think about water in the very material and think about water in terms of, you know, abstraction and calculations, and thinking about, you know, how can claiming back water. And I think a lot of that scholarship tended to focus on that kind of rectifying the wrong by like finding a place to speak about water. But what I try to do is to always think beyond, but also still very much ground myself in the fact that water is inaccessible to people. But I think thinking about rain makes it like more relational and moves it beyond the kind of this kind of polarized view of like lack, the scarcity and the lack versus the abundance, and thinking about, okay, that here is a life world that is trying or attempting to return. I don't know, I'm just trying to think about, okay, for me it's beyond also, it's a resistance of abstraction and a flattening and a singularity of a return of water to achieve justice. So, and I think language plays a very important role. I think a lot of times we end up replicating modes of worldviews and modes of speech and engagement that flattens our worlds unconsciously, right? In terms to remain legible, in terms, so I think a lot of different scholars that are also in this room, a lot of Palestinian scholars who work on water are claiming back that place to speak of water in our own terms, speak of multiple world water, speak of cosmology, spiritualities, which is in the Palestinian context something you think is not a priority right now, right? It's about getting water to people who are dying of thirst, and which is an important reason why we are in this place, is the fact that we have been stripped and displaced and dislocated from our homelands and our waterways and our ways of life because of this settler colonial genocidal project. So I don't know, I try to make sense of all of this by remaining also cognizant and very much aware of you know, that lineage we have and the responsibility we have also to tell these alternative water stories that tend to materialities, relationalities, epistemologies of water.
Yeah, I think I'll just try to address the question on the institutionalization of this kind of alternative materiality of water. I think as far as do we want this to be institutionalized, I think it depends who you ask, of course. And what it looks like also depends what context we're looking at, right? Like the cultural context, the legal frameworks that are already existing, and how we can either build it into that or not. And I think we can also look to a lot of the examples of existing rights of nature efforts around the world and how different those are, and also the different levels of success or lack of success that have emerged from those frameworks. And there's a lot of critique around rights of nature, I think rightfully so, that it's trying to fit the indigenous worldview into a colonial framework of rights, that rights are even inherently colonial. And I think there's a lot to be, thought about and talked about around that. But certainly what we have now is not working. And I think the people at the tribunal, something I found really interesting was that this was officially, a tribunal on the rights of nature. But what I found in reviewing the testimony was that hardly anyone there, aside from, the organizers of the tribunal and the people from rights of nature organizations that are advocating for this, but the actual community members and organizers on the ground that came to share testimony did not invoke the language of rights of nature, did not invoke those frameworks. So that was really interesting to me. So it kind of led me to question, so why did people come? What were they really trying to do by showing up and sharing their lived experience there? And I think it really just spoke to people wanting their, conception of water and of the rivers and of nature to be known and accepted. And I think the end goal, of course, would be institutionalizing it. And however, what the specifics look like are obviously going to vary. But in general, I think it's just that the people, who live with these natural communities and who are in relationship with rivers actually have the agency to care for the river in the way that they want to, right? So I think that ultimately is the goal, and the specifics need to be ironed out, of course.
I saw you scribbling furiously, so...
Yes, and I can also read now. So yes, so no, I just wanted to quickly get into that question on materiality and relationality. And the thing is that we, in the critical social sciences, we, like, if I quote Oliver and Catton, they say water is a total social fact. So the focus has been to say that we need to recognize the heterogeneity in society as water flows through it, and recognize that heterogeneity shapes the way the material outcomes are produced. What I'm saying is also in my presentation, let us also recognize the heterogeneity of water itself. And then we see that how that heterogeneity interacts with the heterogeneity in the social world. So for example, I'm taking Tanvi's presentation from yesterday. Salinity can be in the aquifer for different kinds of farmers, but the landless laborer who drinks saline water and sweats out hours under the sun will have a different material engagement with that water world compared to the farmer who doesn't labor in the field. So those produce different kinds of material outcomes on our bodies, and that again speaks to the remarkable scholarship on feminist political ecology that, for example, Farhana's paper 2011, Geoforum. So yeah, I remember my citations. So the second thing I wanted to also talk about was to Muna, actually. Muna, I was wondering if you will find a connection with the writings of Dilip da Cunha and Anuradha Mathur on the wetness as a way of understanding how it is, how we engage with regimes of moisture, and how does it speak to questions of, rain worlds. So I wanted to see if there's a possibility of a conversation there. Yeah.
Muna, would you like to?
Yeah, give it a try. No, I would love to read the work in more detail for sure, and we'll connect as well on it. But I think something that also Dana, she left, but she was talking about is like also rain worlds open ways of like opening up our understandings of the the constructions of scarcity that have shaped and plagued the work on Palestine in terms of depicting it as this like scarce place that has no water, that needs these solutions that attend, like the solutions that are catered for these dry lands, right? But a lot of kind of attention to rainwater helps us understand that Palestinian fallahin, the peasants of Palestine, have always like understood the rain, understood the wind and the movement, and how it allows for certain, you know, I don't know, due type of due agriculture. And I think Omar also, Assis was talking about it yesterday. But I think it's just like opening up ways of us relating to water in different ways, thinking about our wetlands that have been dried because of Israel's transformations of landscapes, right? Thinking about waterscapes that did not exist, that do not exist anymore because of this ecological modernization project that Israel has carried. So I think it allows us to kind of unearth wetlands that are there, but wetlands that are no longer with us, right? And to also allow us to think of this like history of water that we have never been allowed to say or write or narrate and document. So yeah, it's just it's taking me in that direction rather than the materialities of the wetland. But I would like to see where it can take us further.
Okay, so what I was just told is actually we're standing between us and the party and the people in the party. So we need to all leave so that the party can be set up. And also logistics is just that if anyone wants to use the washroom, please use the one downstairs because this whole space will be closed off. So take your bags, everything. But Amitangshu, do you want to just round things off and close the panel? Sorry. I feel like you should. Yes. Oh. Yeah. Say something nice.
Have I ever done otherwise? Have I ever done otherwise? Why would you say that? So Zuleika has been having a great time with me, as I can see. But the thing is, I just wanted to say that when Tanvi and I had this conversation last year, this was the conundrum that we are going through in how to engage with this topic. And we also realized that there was a lot that could be also talked about that needed space. And I think we are both delighted that we could have that space here in Pollen this year. We got a huge number of submissions which also reinforced and validated the fact that yes, there was interest in this topic. And we had such lovely panels yesterday and today. So I'm grateful to the wonderful panelists who contributed and joined us in this journey. And I hope to carry on with this. By the way, we had a nice conversation with Simon Batterbury. We don't want these conversations to land up in corporate journals. Journal of Political Ecology is a wonderful space which is managed by academics. So he has asked us to consider submitting a special issue. Wow. So let's try and work on that and make sure that these ideas find, shape somewhere. But I also want to thank all of you for making the effort and coming from that campus to this. Yeah. And thank you so much for being with us. We are so grateful. Yeah. Thank you for your support and solidarity.